Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right into a seriously fascinating, kind of grimdark fable today. Imagine for a second that you aren't a person, you're a place. You are the crumbling, ancient architecture of a grand, dying world, just silently watching as the inhabitants down below scramble to make sense of your collapse. Today, we're exploring the parable of the broken syllogism and the radiant ruin, from the very perspective of that crumbling architecture, watching the old world die. It is a stunning look at what happens when our desperate human need for order collides head-on with the beautiful, terrifying reality of chaos. Picture the echoing hollows of a surreal playhouse. From your vantage point up in the vaulted, cracking ceilings and the fracturing marble floors, the once immutable master architecture of this kingdom is experiencing its final, vibrant demise. You, the structure itself, are a witness to a slow, colorful death. It's not just quietly fading away, it's a majestic, vivid collapse. And right down there on the stage of the surreal playhouse, two figures are about to engage in a deeply symbolic conflict over how to handle this absolute end of days. Part 1. The Dying Surreal Playhouse and the Scholar's Burden. Okay, let's meet our first figure on the stage, the scholar. He's this creature of traditional inquiry who feels the absolute weight of the world on his shoulders. Because as the architecture crumbles around him, a totally new presence emerges from the rubble, the shattered mind. This is this fluxing entity born of despair and shifting knowledge. The scholar, who is frankly desperate and terrified, is trying to map this new chaotic entity as if it were just another ordinary chapter in the kingdom's long history of static control. He essentially wants to impose a cold, stabilizing frequency upon the ruins, just to force the world to make sense again. Clutching his ancient scrolls of geometric certainty, the scholar seeks to bind this chaotic entity within the strict confines of academic definition. He really believes that if he can just name it, if he can just build a rigid, logical cage out of syllogisms and formulas, he can survive. The crumbling walls watch as he acts out that deeply human, yet fundamentally flawed instinct we all have, trying to control the uncontrollable by drawing straight lines over a swirling vortex. Part 2. The Scholar's Gilded Cage versus the Wit. As the fracturing playhouse watches from above, we see this whole story framed as a formal debate. But here's the catch. The opponents aren't even speaking the same language. The Wit steps onto the stage and completely, utterly rejects the Scholar's rules of engagement. I mean, in a normal debate, you agree on a premise and argue the points, right? But the Wit realizes that arguing with the scholar would only acknowledge the validity of his cage. So while the scholar demands geometric certainty and traditional debate, the Wit relies entirely on the unbinding power of the absurd to just shatter the premise itself. It is a stunning contrast between the fading, rigid geometry of the old world and the unbridled, vibrant chaos of the new one. For any skeptics out there who've ever felt frustrated by the overly rigid, hyper-structured confines of pure academia, well, this concept is totally for you. The Wit sees the absolute irony in trying to structure the unstructured reality of the void. While the scholar is frantically trying to label the collapse, the Wit simply recognizes that the universe is a tasteless broth and a meaningless error. The profound irony here is that the more the pedant tries to bottle up reality, the faster it slips right through their fingers. Part 3. The Weapon of Absurdity. Let's see how this plays out. This marks the absolute peak of the Wit's personal evolution in our story. He goes from someone quietly observing the debate to an active destroyer of the very stage it's built on. Because rather than countering the scholar's geometric formulas with a different theory, the Wit unsheaths a jagged blade of laughter. Even the architecture itself seems to vibrate with this sound. And this laughter? It isn't joyful or comedic, it's a subversive hot wire. It's a deliberate, calculated weapon slicing straight through the scholar's ice-cold intellect. It is literally the unbinding power of the absurd made audible. The visual contrast here is just breathtaking. The scholar watches in pure horror as his refined verses of the university, his safe, geometric patterns, begin to brutally mutate. The gilded cages of logic aren't smashed by a hammer. Actually, it's wilder than that. They literally peel away like dead skin under the sheer weight of their own rigid impossibility. Beneath the dying gray geometry, the vibrant, pulsing colors of pure chaos begin to shine right through the cracks in the floorboards. Part 4. Theater of Radiant Dissolution. Now, let's step into the Wit's perspective. To him, this collapse isn't some great tragedy. It's a vibrant performance for the dying kingdom. By weaponizing the absurd, the Wit completely transforms the scholar's grim mental fortress into a brilliantly illuminated stage. Here, the logic of the crucible ferments the scholar's desperate certainty into meaningless yet incredibly vibrant motion. The radiant nature of chaotic becoming isn't found in peace or stability. It is found directly in the high-pitched sound of its collapse. The void isn't empty, guys. It is fiercely, radiantly alive. In a wonderful, really ironic twist on the exact kind of academic mapping the scholar loves so much, we can actually chart the inevitable disillusion of these rigid structures. We start with the illusion of static control, right? Then we move into the defensive posture of building gilded cages, melt down into the chaotic broth, and finally we arrive at total ruin. As the fractured pillars of the playhouse look on, it perfectly illustrates how traditions don't just abruptly stop, they melt into the very chaos they tried so hard to keep out. And as we reach that total ruin, we see the ultimate symbol of the loss of absolute intellectual control. The scholar's scrolls, which he once thought were the immutable laws of reality, are revealed to have been authored in disappearing ink. They literally begin to fade right before his eyes, leaving the cosmic page utterly blank so the blood-slicked chaos beneath can finally breathe. The scholar can no longer read the world, he can only experience it. Part 5. The dignity of total ruin. As the traditions shatter and the scrolls just fade to white, we reach our profound, kinda dark lesson. We step fully into the void, no longer seeing it as something to fear, but as the only undeniable truth left standing in the playhouse. The scholar believes he can survive this void by naming it, by categorizing it, and slapping a label on the terrifying expanse of the universe. But the wit thrives by listening to the name dissolve. And this proves that the true spirit of becoming, that vital, untamed energy of existence, can never, ever be bridled by the geometry of the mind. As the last bit of geometric logic melts into the chaotic broth, and the architecture around them gives its final, colorful sigh, the wit turns to the now silent scholar, and he whispers this radiant truth. The most perfect academic tradition is the one that has finally achieved the dignity of total ruin. There is a real dark majesty in letting the broken things finally break. We're left with this hauntingly beautiful visual right there on the stage of the surreal playhouse. Stripped of his unearned majesty and all his protective cages, the scholar is left to perform a perpetual grave dance upon the wreckage. He dances on the dark, fertile ground of the void, which is the exact place where all traditions inevitably go to die so that something new, vibrant, and entirely unstructured can actually be born. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. What gilded cages do you cling to? What geometric certainties are you using to map out the messy, chaotic broth of your own life? Perhaps it's finally time to look at those structures, stop mapping your chaos, and just start listening to the names dissolve. Thank you so much for exploring this radiant ruin with me.